Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Blending Math Instruction for Elementary Grades. My name is Michelle Davis and I'm the Senior Writer for Education Week Digital Directions. Today's webinar has been sponsored by Dreambox Learning. We're a long way these days from rote math worksheets, flashcards, and drills. Today's math teachers can now use blended learning, the combination of digital curricula and tools with face-to-face instruction, to engage and excite elementary school students about math. A blended learning approach gives educators the ability to personalize learning in math, allowing students who want to go at a faster pace to excel, while letting students who need more review, practice, and more time to master math concepts before moving on. Online math games, videos, and interactive curricula are all tools being used in elementary school classrooms today. But what are the best strategies for incorporating these in the existing curriculum? And what techniques work best with students to engage them in blended learning? And what resources are teachers finding that really have an impact on student achievement? Today we've got several guests who can walk us through the answers to these questions and provide some guides on using blended learning resources and techniques in math with elementary school students. We'll hear from Jessica Indelicato, a fourth grade special education teacher at Presidential Park Elementary School in Middletown, New York, and Amy Creedon, a principal overseeing the Race to the Top grant at the Enlarged City School District of Middletown, New York. And then we'll hear from Jill Thompson, an instructional technology specialist at Bishop Spa Professional Development Center in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District. Before we begin, now's a good time to review some of the technical aspects of today's presentation. Please check the audio setting on your computer, as well as your speaker volume settings if you're having any audio trouble. If you're still having issues, please see our detailed audio troubleshooting file, which is available in the handouts folder at the bottom of the console. There are also some other icons that open some additional feature panels in our webinar console. You can read about today's speakers in the bio panel, click the handouts panel to download a copy of today's slides, and follow the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter using the hashtag EWWebinar. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at EWMDavis for lots of news about educational technology and blended learning. I also want to remind everyone to start sending in questions for our guests. Just type them into the Ask a Question box on your console, and we'll get to as many as we can after the presentations end. Finally, an on-demand archive of today's presentation will be available online in the next 24 hours. Both the archive and a free-to-download version of the PowerPoint slides will be accessible through edweek.org. Now I want to get started with our presentations with Jessica and Amy. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking an opportunity to join us today. I'm looking at the chat window and seeing everybody that's signing in, and we're reaching everybody all over, so it's going to be an exciting afternoon. I'm Amy Creedon, and I am a principal managing our district's Race to the Top grant, which the Blended Initiative is a part. I'm just going to give you a little overview of our district before I go ahead and turn it over to Jessica Indelicato, who's a fourth grade teacher that's going to discuss the real on-the-ground implementation aspects of a blended classroom. Middletown is a district that is in Orange County, New York. We're a small city school district located about 65 miles northwest of New York City. The total enrollment in our district is 7,200 students. It's comprised of 4 elementary schools, where all of the elementary schools span grades K through 5. We have 2 middle schools covering grades 6 through 8, and 1 high school covering grades 9 through 12. We have a budget of about $134 million, just to give you sort of a scope on what spending is like in the district. 20% of our total enrollment is comprised of English language learners. 76% of our total enrollment is free and reduced lunch. 51% of our enrollment is Hispanic and Latino population, and 29% is Black. So we are a high needs poverty school district. The Blended Initiative started out of our district's Race to the Top District Award. We were one of the 16 school districts that were fortunate enough to be given some money under that federal reform. Our district received $20 million. So this initiative is funded solely out of that grant award. I'm going to turn it over now to Jessica so she can tell you a little bit about herself and about her role in the Blended Initiative. Jessica?
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Jessica Indelicato. I am a 4th grade special education teacher, and I have a self-contained classroom. In my classroom, I have a 15-to-1 student ratio. I'm in a 15-to-1 setting. This is my first year teaching in a blended learning environment, and this is something that I opted into. The students in my class have a 1-to-1 device ratio. They each have their own Google Chromebook, which they absolutely love. And I teach both math and ELA in a blended learning environment. The students in my classroom are mostly, their ELA and math levels range from 2nd grade through 4th grade.
Okay, this is Amy again. So before I let Jessica go really into, the nuts and bolts of what it's like operating in a classroom, I wanted to give you a little bit of scope about why the district decided this reform, basically answering the question, why blended. So with regards to our district's vision, we really wanted to get down to how could we provide an innovative, personalized learning environment that reaches each student. It's always our district goal to develop academic proficiency at the grade level skills, the knowledge and content that they would need in order to be successful members of our society, graduate, go on to college and career readiness. But what we find inside our district is because of the population that we're serving, we have lots of skill gaps that we have to bridge. And Jessica will get into that in her presentation. But when we started thinking about what our vision was, we thought that there was no better way for us to address the skill gaps by creating a personalized learning environment where blended was a part of that. I'm sorry, we're having a little bit of technical difficulty here. There we go. Okay, so our cohort academic goals is to increase ELA and math both by 10%. We want the number of students that are scoring level 3 and 4 on both our district benchmarks and New York State math and ELA assessments, as well as our math assessments, which are assessments that we do inside our district 3 times a year to get a pulse for where students are at proficiency skills. So we wanted to increase those skills by 10%. So when we thought about our district-wide vision and our academic goals, we thought there was no better fit for us than to develop these blended learning priorities. So the goal of our blended learning environment is to differentiate instruction in each and every classroom down to the individual student level. How we do that is through small group instruction and a really personalized, centered workstation approach focused around math and ELA. So really what happens in that environment then is the shift goes from the teacher being in control of that learning to the teacher, from the teacher taking control of learning to the student really driving the instruction. So some of the key challenges, some I previously mentioned that we face inside our district, were that we have classrooms where students are grouped all together, but they have ELA and math proficiencies that can span across several grade levels. That's no different than anywhere. I'm sure many people are facing similar challenges. We have very low reading comprehension skills across all grade levels. We have high numbers of students that are failing our district benchmarks in both math and ELA, which are directly aligned to the Common Core state standards. And we know that using our district writing rubric, which is a comprehensive rubric, that the students aren't getting the exposure that they need outside of school to writing activities and making data-driven instruction a routine inside our classrooms. So then what we saw, I apologize, I have a delay here with the, there we go, I'm sorry. Then what we saw was the way that blended learning could fit in with that. We wanted the staff to work cohesively together with our technology department and our instructional coaches, use the digital content, the use of nonfiction text, and all technology tools to provide that personalized learning environment. Jessica?
Okay, so the rotational model that I use in my classroom is a 3-group rotational model. Now, this is a model that I chose. There are a variety of models that I could have chosen for my classroom. However, I felt that this best met the needs of my students. The way that the model rotates is as follows. There's about a 20-minute mini lesson, 60 minutes for rotations, so that entails 3 20-minute rotations, and I have a 10-minute close. Now, it's important to recognize that these stations are linked to Bloom's taxonomy. You know, when you're utilizing blended learning, you can increase the amount of time that students are spending at higher level activities. You can see on this diagram here that the students that are engaging in the project and group learning, which is the collaborative station in blended learning, are really getting to those evaluating and creating levels of Bloom's taxonomy, which is crucial. Now, I have found that guided math blends itself very well with blended learning. I'm really able to incorporate guided math and all the components into a blended learning environment. So the way that my math workshop typically runs is I have about a 20-minute whole class lesson where we do a math stretch, a problem of the day, a daily data activity, etc. Then I have my 20-minute rotations, which are small homogeneous groups, and the students are rotating between myself. They have another rotation that's collaborative work, where they're working with their peers. And then there's one last rotation where they're on their Chromebooks utilizing the digital content. And then finally we have a 10-minute close where the whole class is together debriefing the lessons. So this right here is more of a thorough look at the rotational model that I use in my classroom. So you'll see that I have 3 groups. At the start of each lesson, during my whole class opening, I present the objective to the students usually, and they use their interactive notebooks, and they rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 4 based on the stated objective. Which follows is our mini lesson, which is whole class still. And I then quickly explain to students what their collaborative problem is going to be that day. I make sure that I read it for the students since I am in a special education class, and I make sure that they understand the task that they are to be doing with their group members. This really helps with problem solving and making sure that the students won't have questions later on within the rotation. And finally, you'll see that we have our 3 rotations. We have 20 minutes with the teacher, 20 minutes for collaboration, and 20 minutes for the online programming. And then once again, the instructional block ends with our check and reflect. And one thing that I'm always sure to do with the closing is I have the students sitting next to students that are not in their math groups, so that when we share out our thinking during our thinking from the problem-solving activity, students are exposed to other mathematical language and thinking and problem-solving strategies that they didn't or may not have used in their problem-solving activity. Students then rate themselves with a 1, 2, 3, or 4 with how well they think they mastered the objective that day. Now this is the rate yourself that I was referring to. This is a poster I created in my classroom where it just helps the student gauge if they would be a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4 when they self-assess at the beginning of the lesson and at the close of the lesson. Now, with my math groups, I have found that this year, with the students I have in their academic capabilities, my lowest performers, I always have them start with me first after our rotations. but I really have found that this group has remained fairly static due to their levels. I have had most of the same children in my lowest math group this year. My two higher math groups tend to fluctuate more, which is very important, and it's more fluid. It really depends on the skill that we're doing, and those groups change frequently. Now, in the blending learning environment, transitions are key, and I have found that this is actually one of the most difficult parts for me and my students. However, after creating transitions collaboratively with the students, we were able to make up a good rotational system for us. So typically, I ring my chime twice, about 1 minute before we are going to rotate, and this gives the students a chance to clean up and finish their thoughts for what they were working on. Then I clap twice, and this tells students that it's time to move. I've found that the clapping signal is vital. It really reminds the students that if their hands are moving, their bodies should be moving also, and they should be physically rotating to that next rotation. You'll see that I have a schedule posted. There's a picture, and I have 3 different math groups. I have parallelograms, pentagons, and trapezoids. I have my students' names next to those. And then you can see on the right-hand side of that picture, it has the 3 rotations, and there's an icon within each of those shapes to help students know which rotation they should be at. And finally, I ring a bell to signal the end of rotations, and it's time for students to come back to the mini lesson with me. This is just, these are some pictures of the collaborative work portion of my classroom. When I was first implementing blended learning, I thought this would be the most challenging component for me because the students really are, they're by themselves with their group members. There's not teacher support really. I filter around and I walk around. However, I am with my group that I'm working with. So typically what I do is I have at least 2 word problems, sometimes 3 depending on the skill, and I differentiate them. So you can see in the picture, my lowest math group is on the top and they have their own word problem, and then my 2 higher math groups have their own word problem on the bottom. I love seeing the students sitting side by side. I can hear their mathematical thinking, the vocabulary words they're using. I can hear them talking about strategies and problem solving, and honestly, it's amazing to see, and it always makes me smile whenever I see it. After the students finish their collaborative problems, they go into a build, a center choice activity for the week. Now this is a center structure that I found online, which I absolutely love. The students do 1 activity each day, 1 of those letters, and I have those letters differentiated within. So within the B, the buddy games, there are 3 different baskets, and students know to choose from their basket. As well as with the I, the independent work, I have differentiated folders so students can pick from their folder so they would know which program they should be doing. These are some other pictures of my classroom. I have my Chromebook cart. I have my labeled math center with icons and pictures so that students know exactly where the manipulatives are. And finally, I have a picture of my headphone chart. And this is where students put their earbuds after they are finished with their Chromebook. Each student has their own class number. And it helps to know that everything's organized. And I can visually tell who has not put their headphones away. And yes, that's it's actually a hundreds chart. I just saw that question pop up. It was an extra hundreds chart that I have, and I just folded it in half and put Post-its on each of the pockets to label it. Now, I do utilize both math and ELA in my classroom for blended learning. Math, I have found, since it's very skill-specific, they are able to make connections a lot easier into the classroom, which is wonderful. I try to celebrate that when students make connections and really try to encourage them. A lot of times the kids will say, oh, I learned that on Dreambox the other day. That's why my before rating is a 3. And I absolutely love to hear that. And it's important that the students recognize that what they're doing on the Chromebooks is meaningful and helping them. when you're implementing blended learning, it's just important that you are collaborating. It's important that you have professional development. We were very fortunate to have education elements come to our school district. They provided us with excellent professional development over the summer. They gave us they provided us with different rotational models that we could choose from. They had us go through the rotations so that we could see what it was like to be a student in blended learning. Having professional development like that, which education elements gave us, was vital in the process. It's important to have professionals that can help you. We have an outstanding team of technology coaches in our district that help us. And it's also important that you have other people you can talk to. I'm constantly talking to my colleagues, and we're problem shooting together, and we, share what was successful and any suggestions we have for each other, and that's very important. I just bulleted a couple of tips that I thought were crucial for anyone that wanted to implement blended learning. Structure is crucial in the classroom. You have to have an organized classroom with routines. Students need to know their expectations. You need to model the behavior, practice transitions, remind students what they're expected to do, and monitor their progress. Just yesterday, when the students were transitioning in my classroom, when they got to the next rotation, I stopped everything and I congratulated them because they transitioned so well. And, I could see that sense of accomplishment on their faces, and they just seemed so proud of themselves. So it's important really to make the blended learning a collaborative effort where you celebrate successes throughout the way. Next, I would say it's just crucial to be flexible and patient. Everything will not go perfectly the first time, and it's important just to, take note of what you can change, but just understand that things will happen, it will fall into place, and the outcomes are most definitely worth the wait. So an overall impact from my teaching, I find that I'm much more structured. I find that I get equal times with my groups. In the past, I would find myself spending more time with my lowest group, which really wasn't fair to my two higher groups. And with blended learning, it kind of makes me stay structured, which really is great. I'm more confident about my choices. I'm making informed, data-driven instructional decisions. I'm using my data from Dreambox and the other programs that we're using, and it's very helpful. And also, my students are more aware of their goal. They're constantly showing me their Chromebooks and just telling me how proud they are that they've reached, 623 points, and they only have 3 more points to go. So the students really love it. Okay. Here we go. So, lastly, I asked my students, I said, what do you like about blended learning? What would you tell someone else that is your favorite part? And these are some of the quotes that the 4th grade students in my class said. So we just wanted to share these with you.
Thanks, Jessica and Amy. Jessica, let me ask you before you finish up. Does doing this type of curricula in a blended learning environment, using digital tools, using the Chromebooks, do you think that gets the kids more excited? Are they more engaged than they would if you were giving out worksheets or using manipulatives or whatever?
Most definitely, and especially the programs that we're using, they're very child-friendly. They get the kids excited. They get awards that I print out, and there are different tokens they can earn. The Chromebooks are definitely a motivational factor for the students, and they absolutely love them.
That's great. Well, thank you to both of you. That was a wonderful presentation. And before I move on, I just want to introduce our sponsor, Dreambox Learning, and have them speak a little bit about their product.
Thank you very much. Our team at Dreambox Learning is sponsoring today's webinar. My name is Tim Hudson. I'm the Senior Director of Curriculum Design for Dreambox Learning. I'm a former high school math teacher and spent over 10 years in public education. Dreambox offers a rigorous and engaging pre-K through grade 5 math program that helps students make sense of math ideas. Dreambox fully adapts and differentiates for each student no matter where they are in their learning to complement the work of classroom teachers and support personalization in the kinds of blended learning models you've just heard about. At Dreambox, we believe blended learning doesn't mean just digitizing worksheets, and personalized learning doesn't mean every student just moves through the same sequence of lessons and problems at a different speed. Dreambox combines rigorous math, a motivating environment, and our intelligent adaptive learning technology to really improve student learning by inviting and empowering students to think independently and solve problems on their own. Dreambox doesn't use instructional lectures, but rather we build highly visual, very interactive manipulatives that empower students to think in ways that can't be done without technology. If you're interested, I'll share more at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to go to the second part of our webinar with a presentation from Jill Thompson, an instructional technology specialist in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District. Jill?
Hi, thank you. So I want to give you a little bit of background about myself. I've been in education for 10 years. I've been a fifth grade teacher, and then I was a math and science facilitator for a while. And I am just recently an instructional technology specialist and a project manager for personalized learning. I'm also doing a lot with ASCD, as I'm an ASCD emerging leader, and I own my own company called Edulum, and we go out and do professional development for other school districts. You can find me on social media at edu_Thompson and at CMS Jill T. And I also blog once a week, and my blog is called Inside the Classroom, Outside the Box. So our district is very different than Jessica and Amy's, but we are in right now the snowy part of Charlotte, North Carolina. Our superintendent is Dr. Morrison, and our student population is 141,000, and we have over 9,500 teachers, and we have 160 schools, and we have 5 instructional technology specialists that go and help teachers with blended learning. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey of how I started blended learning first in my classroom, and you have gotten a lot of information about exactly what blended learning is. And Jessica talked about the rotation model, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the flipped classroom model. But I think it's really important to know that blended learning combines classroom learning, online learning, in which students can control their time, pace, and place of their learning. But that does not mean that it has to be paperless, and it does not mean that they should not be doing hands-on activities. I think a lot of times we think blended learning and we think technology, and I think that's something to remember. When I talk to other teachers, I always advocate for the teachers to design their blended learning model that best fits them. It's a combination of what's right for yourself and for the students, and you can learn more in depth about these blended learning models at the Christensen Institute website at christenseninstitute.org. So on my journey with flipped classroom, I started about 7 years ago via Twitter. I was in a chat and I heard about this concept, and I thought, well, that's really interesting. I would love to gain more time in the classroom for my kids to do hands-on projects and be able to individualize their learning a little bit more. And so I started researching about flipped classroom, and I went to my principal and I said, hey, I have this crazy idea. I want to try to flip my classroom, send a video that I've created about a math concept, and I want them to do it at home, so then when they come into the classroom, they can have more hands-on ideas. I think it was great that I had a lot of support with my principal to be able to say, yes, go ahead and try that. So it was a risk that I was willing to take, and one that I learned a lot from, and we'll share some of those things I learned with you. So here is my classroom. When I first started this journey, I decided to give a video on Monday, and I wanted my students to complete it by Friday. I did this for a few reasons. The first reason was because I wanted the kids, my students that didn't maybe necessarily have internet at home, to give them an opportunity to make sure that they could get to the video in time. And so this allowed them to either do it at school, they could come go to a friend's house, or they could go to the public library. But it built in a little bit more of that student ownership, where they had to figure out when they were going to do this, video. I also wanted to interject more project-based learning, and so this concept actually freed up some time for me. So the first few times I did the videos, the kids wanted a place to talk to me and ask questions about something that maybe they were getting stuck on. And at the time, there was no LMS system that did this, such as Edmodo or Gaggle. And so I created, at the time called WallWisher, now called Padlet, and I made a little room there where they could ask questions. And I found that was one thing that I definitely needed, is that we needed a space where we could still collaborate even though we were doing that flipped instruction. So another thing to know is that when you're doing blended learning, that does not mean that you are still not doing hands-on. You can see my kids here have still paper with them, and you can see that they're still doing a concept. So how I set it up is on that Friday when the students would come in, they would actually have 3 to 4 problems up on the board, and when they came into my classroom, they would go ahead and get right started into those problems, and I would go around and I would check to see if they had mastered that concept or not. And so they got a check plus. They knew they mastered that concept, and they could go on to the problem-based learning section of my room. They got a check. They knew that we had to try either a couple more questions, or maybe we needed to look at a few things and do a small group instruction. And then a check minus meant that we did not master this concept. We needed to watch this video again or have another small group instruction time. What I found was that students really liked this project-based learning, and so it really motivated the students to want to watch the video, and they loved the fact that they could stop the video and play it again, so they could really look at what they personally needed more. Some kids didn't watch the video, and that was okay with me as long as they came in on Friday and they showed that they had mastered that concept, because that's what I really cared about. So you can see here in the video, the students actually, we were finishing up our geometry and our fraction unit, and the students were actually building me a house. And so they have dimensions there, and they had a certain amount of money, and they actually built me a house. And so you can see them working together in this picture. So then I started getting really into this, and the kids were really loving it and motivation. So I decided I needed to do something a little bit more, and I heard about this Google's 80-20 theory, and now a lot in education we hear called Genius Hour. But it takes the students' passions that they are most interested in, and the students can then build projects based off of objectives that they are working on, but also passions. And so on Fridays, my days became our Google 80-20 days. And what they did is that they would come up with something that they were passionate about, and they would work on their concept during our Fridays, during their workshop time. Something that they might work on, example, is if we were doing geometry, some of the kids would maybe be really into architecture, and so they might want to study the city of Dubai in certain buildings. Another example is when we were in place value. I had a student that had already mastered the place value concept, so we went into different place values, such as the Mayan or the Egyptian place value system, and looked at base 3, base 5, some different base systems other than 10. And the students really loved it because they had so much more motivation, because it's something that they picked, that they liked, and they really enjoyed that. And that came through our conferencing that we did. And I conferenced with my students at least twice a week. And I had 32 kids in my classroom. And it was a challenge, but it was worth it. So I eventually really understood the flipped classroom model, and so I moved on to other blended learning model, which was Flex. And I started using my data to really drive my blended learning instruction. And so this is an example of one of my pre-assessments that I used to determine if my students had mastered the basic skills or not. And you can see there that they the questions are all, they also have the Common Core standard, so I was able to see if a student had mastered that concept, partially mastered, or completely mastered this concept. And it also, again, gave students control because they could see what they've mastered. So when they came to me during the conference time, we could work on what they needed most. And then I was able to make their personalized playlist and different tasks, or sometimes when I use contracts, I would be able to give them a contract that was based on their needs, and then they could go off and do their playlist. Okay. So now it also helps teachers, and one of the things that I tell teachers, besides picking the model that best fits them, is some strategies to work in blended learning. And one is you do not have to necessarily have one device in the classroom. So I didn't. I had multiple devices. I had the students bring their own devices. So you can see there I have iPads, we had Chromebooks, we had some iPod touches, some phones, and you still can do the blended learning model through this. I also noticed some things when I go into teachers, that a lot of times they face the students that they are not working in small groups, they face the computers the wrong way. They have the students facing them versus having the screen facing them. If you have the screen facing you, you can see what they're on, so you can manage it a little bit better. Another thing that is really easy to be able to help differentiate your students is using QR codes around the classroom. And this way, if you need the students to go to a certain website, such as Dreambox, you can have them scan it, and it goes right to their device, which is nice. Also, really putting a lot more emphasis on the student ownership piece. I know that I've said this before, but I think this is one of the parts that is the best for blended learning, is because getting to know your students' needs, but also then showing them how they can improve, because then they're not looking at the grades, they're actually looking at their progress and what they are seeing, which is great. Another is to make sure that you're practicing versus application. I think that is something to also be aware of, and making sure that the standards are aligned, and that you're giving them multiple strategies and multiple ways that they can express how they know their knowledge. So here are some curriculum for blended learning in math. These are some of the tools that I used to create my playlist, to use for my learning management system, and they're all things that students can use for free. And so Khan Academy is one place that a lot of people like to start, because it automatically makes playlists based off the students' data for them, just like Dreambox does using map testing a lot of the time. It makes that for them as well. I also am really liking Open Ed and Sophia.org, where you can make your flipped classroom videos, where you can also have quizzes embedded inside them, and you can see the analytics right there, so you can see when the students are walking in that morning what small groups you need to have and where you need to put different students. Also, TED-Ed, Learnzillion are another great places, and if you want to build your own playlist, you can also do blended spaces as well. I used, when I first started doing flipped classroom, I used a lot of show me's, where I was creating the videos for the students, and then I moved on to having either students create the videos, or I've used now other tools in Sophia and Open Ed as well. We are Google Apps for Education school district, and that is one thing that's really opened up to our teachers to be able to blend their learning. Using the Google Drive and G-Class folders has been a great way to help with the blended learning in the classroom. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about supporting teachers, because in my role I go and I support teachers, and one of the ways I support teachers with blended learning in the classroom is some different models of professional development. One that's really important is called TPAC, which is Technology and Pedagogy and Content Knowledge. And it's really an important thing to show teachers that, technology is not just another thing. It is something that should be seamless into the classroom. Another is the SMART model. And these are models that I go in and help teachers understand and work with. I also make sure to let teachers know this is something that you need to be flexible on and agile. What you do one year with your classroom is not necessarily going to be the same thing that you do the next year in your classroom. Your kids are different. You're different. There's more tools out there that maybe weren't there the year before. But really having that open mindset. I think it's very important to model lessons in the classroom. Go ahead and go in and co-teach. I think a lot of times when I go in and co-teach with teachers, they actually end up seeing that they can do it. And then it takes away that excuse of when they go maybe visit classrooms. It takes away that excuse of, well, it won't work with my kids. And so that is something that I think is very important in the PD, is making sure that not only do you visit other classrooms, but you also model as well. And then innovate time. Innovate time is something that I was really fortunate to have, that my principal gave me, and now I give it to other teachers. Innovate time is something that my principal, Raymond Giudanelli, created, and it was actually giving teachers time outside of their classroom. So he or I, as a math facilitator or the assistant principal, go in and actually teach their classroom and give them the time to maybe go and play with a new web tool or a new blended, or learn more about a new blended learning model. But it gave them that time, and again took away that excuse of time. And then the really reflection and mentor, and really talking things through and having a personal learning network that best meets your needs, which is really very important as well. Remember, this is not going to happen necessarily overnight. So we always have late adopters that are on board, and so some of the things that I have tried and have done is that to get other people on board is to show the benefits to them and make them really feel comfortable about it. I will sometimes know the answer, but just like with kids, I lie and pretend that this is the first time I've ever heard about this web tool, or this is the first time I've ever heard about this concept, to build that rapport and that relationship to make them feel comfortable. I think that's something that is really important. Offer differentiated PD. Not everybody is on the same page, and just like our kids are not on the same page, so are our activities, or so are teachers. And to make sure we have differentiated PD, we started flipping our PD as well. So that is something that you could do in the classroom, or ask your principal to do at the school. So then, again, it builds in that ownership of the teacher as well. But embracing the power of one. Remember that you're not going to change everybody overnight, and you're not going to be able to change everybody. But sparking one teacher will light the fire a lot of the time to the other teachers. And so that is something to keep in the back of your head. And then also, I've done a yeah, but activity, and this has probably been the most eye-opening for a lot of schools when I go ahead and do this. So a lot of teachers have excuses. Yeah, but I can't do this because not all my kids have the internet. Yeah, but my students can't do this because I don't have the time. Whatever their excuses, and so we put up all the yeah buts on different chart papers and stick them up around the room, and then we give them time to now say, okay, well, if you have all these yeah buts, but now you have however many minutes, and you need to come up with at least 3 strategies for each, or you have to have them go around and come up with 1 strategy for each one. And then you have, again, a list of different solutions that teachers can go to and say, well, I said, yeah, but time. Oh, look, I can take innovate time, and then my principal will come in and teach my lesson, and I'll have some time. You know, little things like that help a lot. And again, having patience for these late adopters. You know, not everybody learns at the same time, just like our kids. Sometimes I think we don't give as much patience to teachers, but just remembering giving patience to them as well. So other great resources for blended learning is following some hashtags. There is a hashtag blended learning. There's also 21st Ed Chat on Sundays at 8 p.m. that I actually co-host with a guy named Dave Grindle, who, again, another reason why social media is great is because I've never met Dave, but we run this chat every single week, and it always goes well. And then BYOT Chat, which I missed the hashtag on there, but BYOT Chat is also Thursday 8 that does a lot of great models for blended learning. There's also the websites that I've talked about, such as Education Week, the Clay Christensen, and Getting Smart is also another great resource that have it. And then recently I just finished the World Schoolhouse by Fallon Cal, who is the guy that invented
Khan Academy, and that was a great book that really opened my eyes to other ways of blended learning.
Jill, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I want to ask you, it sounds like you've thought really hard about professional development and giving your teachers the tools to implement this kind of thing. How important is it to not only expect them to do this, but to sort of set aside the time for them to do this? Because I often hear people say, yes, you know, our administrators want us to do this, but there's no time for us to experiment or to learn or to get up to speed.
Yes, I think that's very important. I think that's why the Innovate Time has really worked so well at the school that I was at and in our district, because it, one, takes away that student plus it gives them that time, but also realizing that time could be something that you fail at and that it's okay to learn from your mistakes, and having that risk-free environment I think is very important, as well as the PD.
Great. Great. Well, now we're going to move on to our question and answer session. We've got lots of amazing questions, and I want to get to as many of them as possible. First, I want to start with a question for Jessica. Can you tell me, a lot of people wondered, I know you group your students into these different levels, the trapezoid, whatever. Do they stay in those groups, or do they move in and out of those groups?
They do move in and out of those groups. I found that my lowest group is fairly static. They're pretty low in math, so I found that they stay grouped together most of the time. But my two high groups, my middle group and my high group, they fluctuate a lot, which is one of the reasons that it's crucial that I have my rotational board up on my classroom walls so that students have that visual cue of where their group will go next. So yes, my two highest groups fluctuate a lot.
And there was a kind of a follow-up question to that. Is there any issue with sort of a stigma being attached to the kids who are in the lower group or the groups that are on level or below grade level?
The interesting thing with that is actually I have had students ask me, why do they have a harder problem? Why do I have an easier problem? And it really comes down to talking with the students. Well, what problem do you think is a better fit for you? And I really have found that that helps them. And I try to make sure that when I get into those buddy games and the independent activities, I make stuff that's appealing for all the students and something that they would all want to do. That way it doesn't just look like, my higher group are getting, the more challenging or the more fun activities.
Great. And Amy, let me ask you, here's a question from Patricia. How long would you say it takes to get this type of blended learning program up and running? I mean, is this something you need years to plan for? Is this something you can start incorporating in small ways pretty quickly? Tell me a little bit about that.
I definitely don't think it takes years, but it definitely has to be a comprehensive effort. All facets of the agency have to be involved in it. Actually, the work that we did was very accelerated. We only received the funding to support this project in late spring, and we started right with an opt-in period, last April, May, and the professional development kicked off directly following that. So it was a really expedited process for us. I think the key to that is that we developed wonderful partnerships with the folks that helped us to get our grassroots effort off the ground, and that really is, the credit really goes to not only the district folks, the teachers that are inside it, but the partnerships that we develop with Dreambox and Education Elements, because they really help us drive, what the initiative would look like inside our district.
And you've mentioned Education Elements a few times. Can you just explain briefly what that is?
Education Elements is a company that we partnered with, and they helped us to go through all facets of the blended learning process inside our district. So basically, we sort of went to them and told them what our vision was, what we wanted blended to look like inside our district, what our academic priorities were, and what the challenges were that we were facing inside the district. And we really worked collaboratively, problem solve, and then we put a plan in place. And then they took us through a really intensive professional development, like a blended learning boot camp. And we participated in that with administrators and teachers, and they really helped us to take our vision and bring it to a reality.
Great. Jill, here's a question from Lee Rogers, and they're asking, if you don't have tablets available, is there another option? And I know you have the BYOD initiative there. So tell me a little bit about, because I think a lot of teachers say, well, we don't have Chromebooks. How can we do something like this? Tell me a little bit about how easy or how difficult it is to use a BYOD model with this.
I found it not to be very hard to do the BYOT model, but or to use BYOT for the blended learning model, but I also had the infrastructure. So we had the guest Wi-Fi for our students, which I think is really important. But I think one of the things that we forget about is a lot of the times that we have students all creating the same product, and this is a way that you can, again, have student choice. And so even though they have their own device, they might have a different way of showing the mastery of their knowledge. And so letting them use their device the way they want to helps get over that, well, I don't have all the same devices, or they don't all have to do the same thing.
So you got to be kind of flexible.
Yes, I think with all of this you do.
And let me ask both you and Jessica about data that supports what you're doing. I think that's always a question. You know, this sounds great in practice. It sounds like the students are very enthusiastic. But is there data to support that this is really impacting student achievement?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I find that it's very specific data. You know, with my students in a special education classroom, they're often, you know, 1s and 2s on state assessments, and this data really just shows their growth. So even though, you know, according to the state they're still a 1, I can see exactly where they're making the growth and what target skills they still need to work on for prerequisite skills.
Yes, I agree. When I started 7 years ago, there was no data, so that's where I took a risk. But now there's a lot of data, especially with flipped classroom, that shows that if done correctly, students can make a lot of growth, and I believe it's because, again, we are really differentiating and personalizing the students' learning with it.
That's great.
Yeah, and actually going along with that, you know, with some of the programs we're using, the students do assessments in the beginning, and then they do assessments, you know, halfway through or at the end of the marking period. And I actually shared that information with my students. Now, it didn't show them, you know, what grade level they were working on, but it gave them a score. And I could show them on my personal data sheet, well, look at it, you went up 15 points since the fall. So I just think it's important to celebrate that kind of stuff with the students.
And do you think that gives them a little more ownership over, and a little more, in a way, control? They can see exactly how they're doing. It's not, oh, I'm waiting for this test to come back to see how I did. They can kind of track their progress all along.
Most definitely, and on the programs they can see, you know, what goal they're trying to reach, and they can monitor their own progress. So I love it, and the kids love it.
Let me also ask, any of you can jump in on this one. Are there devices or strategies that you think work better with the younger grades versus the older grades? Are some of these techniques that you mentioned better for older grades or younger grades? Feel free to jump in, anybody.
So I believe that you could do this at any grade level. I've done flipped classroom with as low as first grade. And, I mean, they don't understand that it's flipped classroom. They think, hey, we have video for homework, but they still are mastering the concept, which is what we want. But in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we've taken the approach that our K-5 students are working a lot with iPads, and then our 6 through 8 are working a lot with Chromebooks, and then our high schools are with Chromebooks and also a Windows device. This way, as a student moves through the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District, they actually are learning all different operating systems. And we found that, you know, especially for the little kids, the touch screen for iPads is a lot easier.
That's great. How rigorous, when you're looking at these different digital curricula, Julia Mullis wants to know, how rigorous are these different tools? I mean, the kids like using the computers, but are they really getting sort of the rigor that they would get in the way you might be teaching it without this digital curricula?
What I would say with that is the most important thing is that it's, with it being rigorous, it's individualized for each student. So as you're walking around my classroom, you'll see one student doing elapsed time, one student doing skip counting, one student working on the value of coins. And, rigor really is dependent on each student's abilities, and it really is evident in my classroom that they really are working, on rigorous activities.
I agree, and I also think to remember this is blended, so you're not just sticking the student onto a computer and making it quote-unquote a babysitter. The students are working towards something, and if it's done correctly, and remembering that the technology is just a tool. They still need a really good teacher to be able to do this.
I think that's a great point. I think there are some people out there who think, oh, they're working on the computer, they're working on a program, and the teacher's not interacting with them.
Correct.
No, no, not at all.
That's great. Well, sadly, we have to wrap up this Q&A. We had a lot of great questions. And before we close, we're going to get ready and have a quick message from our sponsor, Dreambox.
Thank you so much. Here at Dreambox, we know that the quality of math software is just as important as the quality of classroom learning experiences. Just as we wouldn't say, well, they're in a math class, so the kids will be learning math. We know what happens in that math classroom is so critical, and you heard some really great ideas today. The same is true with software, that we have schools using Dreambox as a partner for those great classroom experiences. Dreambox has 1,300 math lessons for pre-K through grade 6, and we're going to have more middle school content later this year. We combine here at Dreambox 3 essential elements. You saw this slide earlier. When students are using Dreambox, they have to think critically. It's not just practice, it's embedded practice and conceptual understanding. It develops that vocabulary and understanding of math ideas in a very rigorous way, to that last question that was just discussed. We haven't just digitized worksheets here at Dreambox. And we also don't start lessons by saying, here's how to do something, now go practice it. How many adults don't really understand fraction, division, invert, and multiply? So in Dreambox, understanding is required. We want students to really own the learning and really figure things out for themselves. So at Dreambox, we have full-time, experienced classroom teachers who work closely with our programmers and creative team to build manipulatives for sense-making and really capture how students are thinking. We are inventing new manipulatives that can really only exist digitally. If you're familiar with the Stammer model, our manipulatives in Dreambox are really in the M and the R category. They're modifications, they're redefinitions for how students can interact with math and understand it. We also have our intelligent adaptive engine, which differentiates for each student with millions of unique paths, nonlinear progressions, and adaptivity, informative assessment, and feedback for students that happens in real time based on students' mistakes and strategies. If a student's counting by ones, they need different lessons than a student who's counting by tens. And Dreambox adapts to each student's ideas, to their strategies. You heard that discussed a little earlier, how important strategies are. And it's not, our adaptive engine isn't simply an oversimplified approach where students just make progress based on answering multiple choice items. And lastly, we have the motivating learning environment, where there are games, but they're more than just skills. It's that conceptual understanding. You couldn't take our Dreambox questions and just replace them with state capitals questions, as happens a lot of times with online learning games. We have engaging contexts that are highly visual, concrete, spatial, and they're interactive virtual manipulatives for students to really engage with mathematics. I'm waiting for the slide to catch up here. All right, so as I mentioned, we adapt to students' kinds of mistakes, their efficiency of strategy, the different scaffolding they need, even their response time, really to have a highly personalized experience that students can self-direct their own learning path. We, of course, if students already know something, we want to personalize that learning and let them skip over lessons that they already know. But, of course, if students don't understand something, they need to work through some lessons, and there are usually multiple options and different contexts for students to engage with mathematical ideas. We provide teachers with robust reporting. You can see students working in multiple grade levels at the same time, and it really gives teachers the information they need, like you heard earlier, to make good decisions in the classroom. We also have a report where students can where teachers can pick out a particular topic or standard and see which students have already mastered that in Dreambox, which students are working on it, and which students haven't started it, to really inform those strategy groupings. If you're interested in more information, visit dreambox.com. We offer free classroom trials. We're available on the iPad. And we really appreciate your time and the opportunity to sponsor this great webinar. So thank you to both speakers.
Great, thank you. And I want to remind everyone out there that if they want to learn more about today's topic and other ed tech related issues, Feel free to check out our website at edweek.org, and you can follow me on Twitter at EWMDavis. Also, if you'd like to watch today's presentation again, an on-demand archive will be made available through edweek.org within the